The morning train to Boston hummed softly as it moved through the countryside. Margaret Turner sat by the window, watching the fields roll by like old memories she couldn't quite let go of. At 72, she carried herself with quiet dignity, silver hair neatly tied back, a wool coat buttoned to her neck. Beside her sat her 6-year-old grandson Noah, his legs swinging restlessly, eyes wide with curiosity. It was their first train trip together, a short journey to visit her daughter. But Margaret felt a strange heaviness in her chest, as if something more awaited her that day. Noah leaned against her arm. "Grandma, why are you staring outside like that?" he asked in his small, innocent voice. "Are you thinking about someone?" The question caught her off guard. She smiled, trying to hide the tremor in her heart. "Maybe I am, sweetheart," she said softly. "Maybe someone from a long time ago. Was he nice?" Noah asked. Margaret hesitated. She didn't expect that question, but she answered anyway. "Yes," she whispered. "He was very nice." Noah grinned, satisfied with the simple answer, and went back to playing with the little toy car in his hands. But Margaret's eyes stayed fixed on the reflection in the train window. In it, she saw not her aged face, but flashes of a young girl standing by a lake, her hair blown by the wind. Her heart full of promises she believed would last forever. That girl had once been her. The rhythmic sound of the train brought her back to the present. Passengers murmured around her, some reading newspapers, others lost in thought. The soft sway of the carriage made Noah yawn. Margaret placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, feeling a mix of peace and nostalgia. She hadn't taken a train in years. Her late husband, Thomas, used to drive everywhere. But this time she wanted to travel differently, to slow down, to see the world through a window again. Like she used to when she was young. At the next stop, the train paused with a low hiss. The doors opened, letting in a rush of cold autumn air. Margaret looked up casually, and her heart nearly stopped. A tall man stepped onto the platform, silver-haired, carrying a worn brown leather bag. His face was older, lined with years. But his presence was unmistakable. It couldn't be. Richard Hayes, Richard, the man she hadn't seen in 50 years. Her pulse quickened. For a moment, she thought her eyes were deceiving her. But when he turned slightly toward the aisle, she saw the familiar curve of his smile, the calm in his eyes. He was real. She froze, gripping her handbag tightly as he scanned the seats, searching for an empty spot. Noah tugged her sleeve. "Grandma, what's wrong?" She swallowed. "Nothing, darling," she said, though her voice trembled. "I just thought I saw someone I knew." He found a seat 2 rows ahead, placing his bag gently on the floor. Margaret watched him from behind, her heart beating faster than it had in years. How could fate bring him here, on this random morning, on this very train? After everything. The train started moving again. The wheels clattered over the tracks, echoing the racing of her thoughts. She tried to calm herself, but memories flooded in. The summer of 1969. The lake house, the smell of pine trees, and the laughter that filled the air. She remembered how they used to sneak away to the old bridge and talk for hours, dreaming of a future that never came true. She had loved him then with the kind of love that only happens once. But life had taken them different ways. Her parents hadn't approved. His job had moved him across the country. And before they could find their way back, time had built walls between them. "Grandma." Noah's voice pulled her back. "Why are you smiling?" She blinked, realizing there were tears in her eyes. "Just remembering something nice. That's all," she said when the train slowed again. More passengers boarded, and Margaret looked up just as Richard turned toward her. Their eyes met. For a moment, both of them froze, two souls recognizing something that time had only hidden, not erased. "Margaret," he said softly, disbelief in his voice. She managed a small smile. "Hello, Richard." He stood still, as if afraid to move too quickly and break the moment. "It's been a long time. 50 years, give or take," she replied quietly. Noah looked between them, puzzled. "Grandma, you know him?" Margaret took a deep breath. "Yes, sweetheart. I knew him a long time ago." Richard smiled warmly. "You haven't changed much." She chuckled softly. Oh, I've changed plenty. You just have kind eyes. They make people look younger. He laughed. That same easy, gentle laugh she remembered. I don't know about that. My doctor says I look tired most of the time. Margaret smiled again, though her heart was aching. There was something surreal about seeing him after all these years. She wanted to ask him 1,000 questions, where he'd been, what life had given him, if he ever thought of her, but she didn't know where to start. Noah leaned closer, whispering loudly, Grandma, is he your friend? Richard chuckled. You could say that. Margaret's lips curved faintly. Yes, Noah. A very old friend. The boy nodded and went back to playing with his toy. But for Margaret and Richard, the air between them grew heavy with unspoken words. He finally sat down across from her, and for a while they said nothing. The train passed over bridges and through forests painted gold and red by autumn. Then, as Noah fell asleep against her shoulder, Richard spoke quietly. I thought I'd never see you again, he said. So did I, she admitted. He looked down at his hands. I tried once. Years ago? But your family had moved. I figured you'd married. I did, she said softly. He was a good man. He passed away 6 years ago. Reacher nodded. I'm sorry. She looked at him carefully. And you? Did you ever? He smiled faintly. Yes. My wife, Claire. She passed 3 years ago. Cancer. Sorry too, she whispered. They sat in silence for a long while. The past hung between them like a shadow neither could escape. Then Richard said, You know, I still remember that night by the lake. You told me you'd always look for me in every crowd. Her eyes glistened. I guess I finally found you again. He smiled sadly. Or maybe you never really lost me. The words made her chest tighten. She looked out the window, not trusting herself to speak. The train slowed again, and Noah stirred awake. Grandma, he mumbled sleepily, are we almost there? Soon, sweetheart, she said, brushing his hair. Then he asked, as innocently as only a child could, Who's that man, Grandma? You're smiling at him different. Margaret froze. Richard's eyes softened, a quiet understanding passing between them. She laughed gently, trying to mask the emotion rising in her throat. He's just someone who used to make me smile a long time ago. Noah tilted his head. Do you still like him? Richard looked down, pretending not to listen, but his hands tightened slightly on his bag. Margaret hesitated. She didn't know what to say. How do you explain to a 6-year-old that some feelings never disappear, even after decades? She took Noah's small hand and whispered, Some people stay in your heart forever, even if life takes them away. Noah nodded slowly, as if he understood more than she expected. Then he yawned and leaned back against her arm again. Richard met her eyes. He's a smart boy. She smiled softly. He is. For the rest of the journey, neither spoke much. The sound of the train filled the silence, steady and comforting. Margaret looked at Richard once more, realizing that maybe fate had given her a small gift. One last chance to remember what it felt like to truly love someone, even if only in memory. When the announcement for their stop came, Noah woke up fully. Grandma, it's time. Margaret stood, picking up her bag. Richard rose too. For a moment, they just stood there, facing each other as if the world had gone quiet around them. Maybe we'll see each other again, she said, though her voice wavered. He smiled gently. Or maybe this is the universe saying goodbye properly this time. As she stepped off the train, she turned one last time, through the window. Richard waved the same warm smile that once stole her heart, and when Noah tugged her hand and asked, Grandma, why are you crying? She smiled through her tears. Because, my dear, she whispered, sometimes memories find their way back when you least expect them. She looked at the train disappearing into the horizon, feeling both sorrow and peace. It wasn't just a journey to Boston anymore. It was a journey through time, one that had finally brought her full circle and deep inside. She knew that the boy beside her and the man on that train would both live forever in her heart, in very different but unforgettable ways. The next morning in Boston, the city was buzzing with weekend noise, cars, laughter, and the low hum of distant trains. Margaret sat at her daughter's kitchen table, sipping coffee while Noah ate his cereal. Yet her thoughts were far from the clatter of spoons and milk. All night she had dreamed of the train of Richard's eyes, his gentle voice, the way he had said her name, like time hadn't touched it. She had woken with tears she couldn't quite explain. Her daughter Emily noticed. "You okay, Mom?" she asked, rinsing a plate. "You look a little pale." Margaret smiled faintly. "I'm fine, dear. Just tired." That train ride brought back a few old memories. Emily nodded, unaware of the weight behind those words. She kissed Noah's forehead and said she'd be out for errands. Once she left, the apartment fell quiet. Margaret sat in the sunlight that poured through the window, her heart heavy with questions she hadn't asked and answers she might never get. Noah sat across from her, swinging his legs. "Grandma," he said suddenly, "was that man on the train your boyfriend?" The spoon slipped from her hand and clattered against the cup. "What makes you think that?" she asked, trying to sound calm. "You looked at him like Mommy looks at Daddy when she's happy." Noah said simply. "You smiled, but your eyes looked sad too." His innocent words pierced her like a memory come to life. She took a deep breath. "No, sweetheart, he wasn't my boyfriend," she said softly. "But he was someone I loved very much a long time ago." "Why didn't you marry him?" Noah asked. Margaret stared out the window, watching a bird settle on the rail. "Because life doesn't always let you keep the people you love," she said quietly. "Sometimes you have to let them go, even when you don't want to." Noah frowned. "That's sad, 'tis," she whispered. "But it's also how we learn what love really means." Before she could say more, there was a knock on the door. She wasn't expecting anyone. She walked slowly to open it and froze. There he was. Richard stood on the doorstep, holding a small bouquet of white tulips. "I hope this isn't too forward," he said gently. "I asked the conductor from yesterday if he remembered where you got off. I just wanted to make sure I didn't imagine it all." For a moment, Margaret couldn't speak. Her heart raced, caught between disbelief and joy. "You came here?" "I had to," he said. "There were too many things left unsaid." Noah peeked from behind her. "Grandma, it's the train man." Richard laughed warmly. "That's me." Margaret let him in, still trying to steady herself. He looked around the apartment politely, his presence filling the quiet space with something she hadn't felt in years, a calm, familiar warmth. "Would you like some coffee?" she asked. "Only if it comes with company," he replied. They sat at the table, the same place where moments ago she had been thinking of him. It felt unreal the way time folded in on itself, making decades feel like days. So she began softly. "What brings you to Boston, really?" "I was on my way to see my daughter," he said. "She lives in New Hampshire. But after yesterday, I couldn't just leave. It didn't feel right." She looked at him thoughtfully. "After all these years, what did you expect to find?" He smiled faintly. "I wasn't sure. Maybe just a chance to say I never forgot you." Her heart trembled at his honesty. "I never forgot you either," she admitted. He looked down, his voice quiet. "I thought about you every New Year's Eve. That night by the lake, the fireworks, your red dress, the promise we made. I kept wondering if you remembered." "I did," she said, her eyes glistening. "Every year. But after a while, I told myself it was just a memory." "Some memories don't fade," he murmured. "They just wait for the right moment to return." Noah, sensing the grown-ups were lost in a different kind of conversation, went to his room to play. The apartment was silent again, except for the ticking of the clock. Richard leaned forward slightly. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if things had been different?" She smiled sadly. "Every now and then. But life isn't a book we can rewrite, is it?" "No," he said. "But sometimes we get a new chapter." Margaret felt her eyes sting. "And sometimes the old ones still hurt." He reached across the table, hesitated, and then rested his hand lightly on hers. "Margaret, I never stopped caring. I built a life, had a family, did my best. But a part of me always wondered if I'd made the right choices. She looked at their hands, old, lined, but still warm. We were young, she said softly. We did what we thought we had to. He nodded. I left because I thought I was doing the right thing for both of us. I didn't want you waiting while I was away building my career. I thought I was sparing you heartache. But it turns out I just gave it to both of us. Margaret took a deep breath, feeling the truth of his words settle deep in her heart. Maybe we were meant to meet again, she said quietly. Richard smiled gently. Maybe we were. Just then, Noah's voice broke the silence. Grandma, can we go to the park later? Margaret smiled at him. Of course, sweetheart. Richard rose to his feet. I should go, he said softly. I didn't mean to interrupt your day. She stood too. You didn't. I'm glad you came. He looked into her eyes one last time. Would it be too much to ask to see you again before I leave? Her answer was quiet but sure. I'd like that. When he left, she stood by the window, watching him disappear into the afternoon crowd. Her hands trembled slightly, not from age but from emotion. It was as if the universe had handed her back a piece of herself she thought was lost forever. That evening, as she tucked Noah into bed, he asked another question that hit deeper than she expected. Grandma, did that man love you? Margaret sat down beside him. Yes, sweetheart. I think he did. Do you still love him? She smiled sadly. Sometimes love doesn't go away, even if people do. It just becomes quieter. Noah thought about that for a moment, then said, You should tell him. Before he goes away again. She laughed softly. You're wise beyond your years, little one. When he fell asleep, Margaret sat by the window again, watching the city lights shimmer like fireflies. The train from the day before ran through her mind, the sound, the faces, and Richard's voice saying her name. She knew what she had to do the next morning. She took Noah by the hand and boarded the early train back to the station they'd arrived from. Her heart raced with both excitement and fear. What if he'd already left? What if she was too late? But when the train stopped, there he was standing near the bench, holding a paper cup of coffee, as if waiting for her. When he saw her, his expression softened with relief. You came, he said quietly. I had to, she replied. My grandson gave me advice I couldn't ignore. He smiled. Smart boy. They sat together on the platform, the cool morning breeze brushing against their faces. I don't know what this means, she said honestly, but I don't want to say goodbye again. Not like before. Richard nodded slowly. Then let's not, for the first time in years. Margaret felt something lift from her heart, the old ache replaced by something gentler, something real. As they sat watching the trains come and go, she realized life had given her something she'd never expected. Not youth, not a second chance at old love, but peace. And yet, she knew the story wasn't over, because Noah, with his innocent heart, had seen something she hadn't. That love, even after decades, still finds its way home. The days after that morning at the station passed quietly but meaningfully. Margaret found herself smiling more, laughing a little easier, and looking forward to the simple things again, the sound of the kettle, the feel of sunlight through her curtains, and the phone calls that now came every evening from Richard. Their voices met, halfway between nostalgia and something new. He told her about his late wife, about how quiet his house felt now, about his grown children who lived far away. She told him about Thomas, her late husband, how kind he was, how their life had been full of peace, but missing a certain spark she never could explain. They both spoke gently, like two people rediscovering the language of closeness. Noah noticed too. Grandma, you're smiling at your phone again, he teased one morning. Margaret blushed. Am I not allowed to smile? You only smile like that when it's him, Noah said matter-of-factly, returning to his cereal. She couldn't help but laugh. You notice everything, don't you? I just think he makes you happy, Noah said. That's good. Later that week, Richard invited her for a train ride to the coast. Just one more journey together, he had said. It was the same line they used to take in their youth, where the tracks wound through small seaside towns and opened to a view of the Atlantic. Margaret hesitated for a moment, but something in her heart told her to go. The day was bright, the sky washed clean by a morning rain. When she reached the station, Richard was already there, waiting on the platform with that same small bouquet of white tulips, her favorite, you remembered. She said softly, "I never forgot." He replied. They boarded together, finding a seat by the window. As the train started moving, the world outside blurred into streaks of gold and green. The rhythm of the wheels filled the silence between them. It wasn't awkward, it was comforting, like a familiar song. "I can't believe we're here again," Margaret said, gazing out. Richard smiled. 50 years later, and you still make this train ride feel like the first one." She laughed quietly. "You always were a charmer." He looked at her with warm eyes. "And you always pretended not to like it." Their laughter faded into a calm silence. The countryside rolled past barns, rivers, distant hills. For a long time, neither spoke. Then Margaret said softly, "I used to dream about this. Seeing you again, wondering what I'd say if it ever happened. And now that it has, I don't know what to do with it." Richard nodded. "Sometimes we think closure means forgetting, but maybe it just means forgiving ourselves and each other." She looked down at her hands. "Do you ever regret leaving?" He took a moment before answering. "Every day. But I also believe things happen the way they must. If we hadn't gone our separate ways, maybe we wouldn't appreciate this moment the same way." Margaret smiled faintly. "That's a kind way of looking at heartbreak." He reached over, gently resting his hand over hers. "Heartbreak means there was something worth missing." She didn't pull away. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel what she had spent years burying, that deep warmth that never truly faded. When the train stopped at a small coastal town, they stepped out together. The sea stretched wide before them, endless and calm. The air smelled of salt and thyme. "Remember the last time we were near the ocean?" Richard asked. "How could I forget?" She replied, "We promised to come back one day," smiled sadly. "It took us a while." They walked slowly along the pier. Margaret's scarf fluttered in the breeze. The world felt suspended, like the universe had paused to let them breathe. "I thought I'd forgotten how to feel this way," she said quietly. He looked at her gently. "You didn't forget. You just kept it safe." They sat on a weathered bench, watching the waves roll in. Margaret felt a strange sense of peace, the kind that comes when you stop fighting the past and start accepting what it gave you. "You know," Richard said, "I don't think this is about starting over. I think it's about finishing right." She turned to him. "Finishing right?" He nodded. "We didn't get our story then, but maybe we get to write the ending together now. Something honest, something that feels true." Our eyes softened. "I'd like that." They stayed there for hours, talking about everything and nothing. The sun began to set, painting the water in shades of gold and rose. When it was time to go, Richard helped her back to the train, his hand steadying hers as the train moved again. Margaret felt a quiet ache, not of sadness, but of gratitude. Life had taken so much time from them. Yet it had given them this one last day to understand what love really meant. Halfway through the ride, she leaned her head against the window, watching the reflection of his face beside hers. "Do you think we wasted too much time?" she asked softly. He shook his head. "Time isn't wasted if we still find each other in the end." Her heart warmed. For the first time in decades, she didn't feel lonely when they reached the city. Night had already fallen. Richard offered to walk her home. The streets glowed with streetlights and soft rain. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to dot at her doorstep. They stopped. "Thank you," she said, "for finding me again." He smiled. "Thank your grandson." He was right. You shouldn't let people go twice. She laughed quietly. He's wise for his age. They stood there for a long moment, neither wanting to say goodbye. Finally, Richard said, "May I see you tomorrow?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. Tomorrow, and she did. For weeks they met for coffee, for walks by the river, for simple moments that felt like stolen time. They didn't talk about the years between, only about what they had now. Noah adored him, calling him Grandma's train friend. which always made Richard chuckle. Then one crisp morning, Richard called and asked her to meet him at the train station once more. "One last trip," he said. When she arrived, he was sitting on the same bench where they'd met eyes that first day. He looked a little pale, but his smile was the same. "I wanted to give you something," he said, handing her an envelope. Inside was a photo, the two of them young and laughing at the old lake house. "I kept it all these years," he said softly. "I thought you should have it now." Her eyes filled with tears. "Oh, Richard, I wanted you to remember me happy," he said gently. She frowned. "Why are you talking like this?" He smiled, weary but calm. "Because life is short, Margaret. And I want you to know finding you again was the best ending I could have asked for." Her hands shook. "Don't say that." He reached out, touching her cheek. "Promise me you'll keep smiling, even when you think of me." She nodded, unable to speak. A week later, Richard passed away peacefully in his sleep. The news came from his daughter. Margaret sat quietly, holding the phone, unable to cry at first. It didn't feel real until she looked at the photo he had given her. Then the tears came, gentle and endless dot at his small memorial by the sea. She placed the white tulips he had once brought her. The wind brushed her hair as she whispered, "We finished, right, didn't we?" Noah held her hand, confused but wanting to comfort her. "Grandma," he said softly, "is he in heaven?" She nodded, smiling through tears. "Yes, darling. And I think he's happy." Noah squeezed her hand. "You'll see him again someday, right?" She looked out at the waves. "Yes," she whispered. "When the train comes for me?" Years later, long after Noah had grown up and the world had changed, people still remembered the old woman who sat by the sea every week with a single white tulip in her hand. She never missed a Sunday dot, and one quiet afternoon, as the tide came in and the sky turned gold, Margaret closed her eyes and felt the familiar rhythm of a train in the distance, the sound of wheels, the whisper of wind, the echo of a voice saying her name. She smiled, peaceful at last, as if she had finally reached the station she'd been traveling toward all her life. Because love, she had learned, doesn't end with goodbye. It simply changes trains and waits for us at the next stop.